Hello and welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's episode, we sit down for a visit with Barbara O'Connor. Thiesse informs us about the new tax law establishing beginning farmer tax credit. And we talk with University of Minnesota Extension educator Liz Stahl about developments in cover crops. All here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Southern Minnesota Center for Agriculture, promoting education and careers in agriculture, connecting students with college, curriculum, and industry resources to develop, fill, and sustain jobs with agriculture in our region.
Welcome to Farm Connections. We traveled to Blooming Prairie, Minnesota, on a farm just a few miles southwest of town to learn about the richness of our prairie, the richness of our life, and the richness and the culture of agriculture. And to help us do that is Barb O'Connor. Barb, welcome to Farm Connections.
Thank you.
You've showed me your home. I learned a little bit about your farm. It's a fascinating story and a fascinating journey that you've lived and still live. Tell us a little bit about some of those early years.
Well, I was born in 1933. It was right after the Depression. And I grew up on the farm. We've lived here in this community, in this area, for ever since 1935, when my father purchased the farm after it had been lost twice to a widow from other people. And it cost him $100 down payment, which he sheared his sheep in February to raise that money for the down payment. And the total price was $50 an acre for some of the best land around. So that was my beginning.
Well, that's an interesting start. And you know, while $50 an acre sounds very, very reasonable by today's standards, there probably was a lot of effort and challenge to get it paid for at that price.
It was. It was 280 acres of some of the best land around, and my father worked very hard for bringing it up to snuff. He believed in all the latest hybrids and chemicals and anything that could make him a little extra money. He particularly believed very strongly in tiling out the land, even though he did it by hand.
Well, you have a wonderful family. You also went through some good times and then maybe some bad times. When we think about agriculture, it's cyclical. It's cyclical in weather, it's cyclical in production and volume of production and yield. It's cyclical in the economics and price. Any times stick out at all?
The 80s were very challenging. I didn't realize there was anything going on out here, even though I had a tax business and talked to a lot of farmers. But one night, I was sitting at the office working about 7 o'clock at night, and I got this phone call. And they said, "Mrs. O'Connor?" "Yes." "Would you like to know what's happening now with the banks and the credit history?" "Oh, yeah, I always was curious." "Good, we'll be there to pick you up in 15 minutes. I said, "Okay." I didn't know who they were. I didn't know them. I had never met them. I didn't recognize their names. I didn't know where we were going. But something just drove me. I just had to find out what was going on. Curiosity killed the cat, but I must not be a cat because I'm not dead yet. And I got in that car with those people. Thank heavens there were 2 wives and 2 men, and they were farmers. And we headed out for Lewiston, Minnesota. And we stopped at a dairy farm. And in that dairy household There were, now this was August 19th, 1983. There were 19 farm families that were in various stages of hysteria, absolutely tears, shouting. There was a lot of hostility and a lot of hopelessness. They just did not know what to do, what the defense was. They had just gotten their 30-day notice, pay up the final loan or give up their house, their homes, their livelihood, their machinery, their livestock, and there was no way to get their crop out to sell it, to raise that money. It was going to be just taken away.
And at that point, the bank was saying, we don't want this year's payment. We want the entire principal due that was scheduled over many years. We want it all due now.
No,
So
30 days.
it's like instead of making August house payment, if you're equating it to a house mortgage, you pay the entire balance in full that you do, and you expected to pay it over many years, except it's multiplied by many times because it's a farm.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge loan.
It is.
So when you went in, was this a home or in a building, public building? What?
It was a house.
Really? 19 families or 19 people?
19 husband and wives.
So probably
19 families
wow.
working, not the kids.
Wow. So what did you think when you walked in and experienced this?
At first I was in shock, really. They can't do that, can they? Well, they are, was the reply. Mm-hmm. And I was very quiet all the way home because I kept thinking if they could do that to them, they could do that to us. It will spread. It won't just stay in this small community. It will spread. And history repeats itself, they always say. And my father had experienced hearing about this back in the 30s. And so when I got home, my husband was very angry because I hadn't taken time to call him and tell him why I was gone, but my car was still there. And I was no place around. But when I told him what it was all about, then he started wondering too, well, what can these people do? So we set about trying to find out just what we could do, the alternatives. And I put on message over the radio. If anybody was having trouble with their loans or their lenders, to come to a meeting at the Catholic Church basement where I was going to put on some speakers. And I did. I rounded up a couple of attorneys and some people that had already gone through some of this, and we were presenting an alternative. There were 90-some people that showed up. And I and my husband and 2 other farm wives got in the car one day, and we firmly believed in government by the people, for the people. And we headed for Washington, D.C. And we got there, and we didn't receive a real good, we didn't go there with the idea of causing any problems or anything else. We just wanted to know what the government was going to do about this. And one of the legislators that I talked to started petting me kind of, you know, on my shoulder, so to speak, saying, well, now it can't be that bad. You don't need to worry. So I got kind of angry. I told him, why don't you just sit down and shut up? And I'll tell you what's happening. And then I went to see the representative. And I told him my story, and he listened. I got to talk to him myself. And he told me the truth. He said, frankly, we're not going to do anything. You have to do it yourselves. So then we really got to work. We went, testified before the Senate Ag Committee in the state of Minnesota. We were asking, the sole thing we were asking for was time. The crops had to be harvested before they could make payments. Mm-hmm. And we wanted 6 months. 6 months leeway to see if we could raise the money for everyone that was having foreclosure problems. And actually there were some farm advocates that came through there and had information for us too. And we did get, Minnesota was the first one that came through with giving the extra time,
Is it called a moratorium?
moratorium, yes. And so that was very helpful. It kind of slowed things down and gave them some hope. And we had some other meetings. We met once a week. It was just out there general. Anybody having trouble, they could show up at this one household on a certain night. I guess it was Thursday nights. And we discussed this thing and see if there was any way out. And that helped. It helped a lot of people get it out of their system, and they realized then that they were not the only ones.
It's important to attack the situation, not the people.
Yes.
And the situation was the prices did not support the cost of raising that crop or raising that livestock and paying interest and loans on top of that. And then of course there's family living. So you didn't leave it alone there. You were involved, I think you said something once about a red jacket?
Oh yes, yes. The organization was started, I believe, Nebraska Women, and it was called Women Involved in Farm Economics, or WIFE. And they put on a march on Washington. We met once a year in Washington, D.C., and we wore red because we were tired of operating in the red. And when we got together as a group, like say 90-some women, and marched, they stopped traffic for us. I mean, traffic just stood to us, and we just marched down. And it was, we had their attention then. I think the red flag was the best. And we wore red jackets, and I had a red sweatshirt that said wife on it. And we met with our congressmen, discussed what was happening in our area. And that, they still are meeting. WIFE still exists. We still have a chapter here in Minnesota. And it went pretty much nationwide.
Well, and thank you for your advocacy work for agriculture and for families. And of course, that led to your family staying on the farm and being successful and raising your family in that way. And of course, now you have many grandchildren and they're all still involved in agriculture. And without that chance, without that time, without that moratorium, and without the work you did, that may not have happened. Thank you so much, Barb.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Hi, this is Thiesse. In 2017, Minnesota passed a new law to encourage the owners of farm assets to sell or lease those assets to beginning farmers. Any farm owner that sells or leases land, livestock, machinery, or other farm assets to beginning farmers receives a tax credit. This is a nice way for farmers that are retiring that want to pass those assets on to the next generation. The Minnesota tax credit law is administered through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture Rural Finance Authority. The states of Iowa, Nebraska, and some other states have similar type programs. For the purposes of the Minnesota tax credit program, a farm asset is defined as farmland, livestock, machinery, buildings, or other assets that can be sold or leased to another individual. The definition also provides that beginning farmers are any farmer that has 10 years or less experience, has a net worth of slightly over $800,000 or less, has the ability to manage and operate the farm operation that's being proposed, and will be able to show a positive cash flow. In addition, the beginning farmers cannot be directly related to the owner that is selling or leasing the assets, and they also must agree to be at a certified farm business management program. Assuming the farm operator has met this criteria, the owner of the farm assets could qualify for a tax credit about the 5% of the sale price of the asset that's being sold, either the lesser of the actual sale price or the fair market value of that asset. They also could qualify for 10% of the rental amount, the gross rental amount on land or another asset for a 3-year period, not to exceed $7,000 per year. Or if they choose to use a share rental agreement, they could qualify for 3 years at up to $10,000 per year maximum. The newer tax credit in Minnesota and similar programs in other states encourages the owners of land, livestock, machinery, and other farm assets to work with beginning farmers. Also, this program offers beginning farmers a chance to purchase or lease these assets that might not otherwise get a chance to do so. In addition, many ag lenders work with the Farm Service Agency through USDA and state departments of agriculture to offer beginning loan programs for these beginning farmers to help them with the purchase or lease of these assets. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.
Farm Connections is on site at Clarks Grove, Minnesota at the Kiter Seed Day. And with me is Liz Stahl. Liz, welcome to Farm Connections.
Thank you.
You're a University of Minnesota Extension educator and you do an awful lot of great things with cover crops. Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, with cover crops, there's a lot of press been out in the media about cover crops. A lot of great potential benefits that we can have with cover crops, ranging anywhere from water quality enhancements and also from the farmer's standpoint, you get better infiltration, better soil health, again, less runoff. There's potential to help uptake nitrates in the soil, for example, too, with cover crops. So that's a great benefit, not only for the farmer, but also for, the environment and everybody, again, from that water quality standpoint. But I look at a key thing in our state, just that erosion potential too, from wind erosion and soil erosion to help reduce the potential for that. Plus also we're looking at long-term productivity of the soil. That's hopefully, just gonna increase the bottom line for a producer long-term down the road as well. And a lot of other benefits too, but some of those are some of the big factors of why people are really looking at cover crops.
Great reasons. And as we look around, even where we're standing, rich nutrients, soils that are awesome and productive. If we don't protect them, we've got a problem.
That's exactly right. That's the thing. I think we've been very fortunate. I know we've been very fortunate with all the topsoil that we have. And the thing is, we want to protect that. We want to have that there for future generations. So again, protecting that and enhancing it when possible as well. One thing with cover crops, we can reduce tillage as well too. Looking at that with the system integrating reduced tillage with cover crops, that's really a great way to enhance soil health and again, long-term productivity. We can see out in fields, when you look across the landscape and see how, upper knobs of the soil, you can see that topsoil is gone. Again, we want to protect that, and that's again where one role that cover crops can help out is again just that whole protection and keeping the soil productive long-term future generations.
So talk a little bit, Liz, if you will, about the research you're doing on cover crops and maybe where you do it.
Yeah, and some of the work that I do, and again, I work with a lot of the different researchers and helping get out their information that they're doing because I like to look at it from the agronomic standpoint. We have a lot of corn and soybean growers, and the big questions are, okay, how do cover crops fit into that system? It's different than, say, if you're down south where you have a longer growing season, you've got a longer time to get that cover crop established. You get up to Minnesota, got a much more condensed growing season. This spring, we didn't really have a spring, and so how do you get a cover crop established with that? So, and also in the fall, again, further south, people can get cover crops out on the soil after harvest. We really don't have that big window, and it's very rare that we could have successful establishment. So, a lot of the research is looking at how can we successfully interseed cover crops, without having a negative impact on our cash crop. And so looking at what seeding rates can we use, what species should we use a mix? So those are all things. The seeding method, can we drill it, do we broadcast it, can we aerial seed? All those factors play a role in the research that's going on right now at the University of Minnesota. Plus, we talk a lot about, too, from the herbicides aspect, too, because, again, we're looking at a corn-soybean system, herbicide-resistant weeds. That's a huge issue that we have to deal with right now in the state, and a key tactic to manage herbicide resistance is to have an effective, soil-applied or residual herbicide out there in the system. Well, unfortunately, those soil-applied herbicides can control the cover crop, too. So, looking at that, how can we integrate a soil-applied herbicide into a cover crop system and have that successfully established. So that's another area that we're looking at as well. And of course, looking at yield impacts. Is this cover crop having a negative impact on yield? Just talking about research today out of Lamberton that they've been working on at several locations, and when they do an early interseeding of cover crops, when corn's say about knee-high, we talk about the V4 to V6, that's about knee-high corn. We haven't seen that be a negative impact on yield, but you can hopefully reap the benefits of having a cover crop, more protection on the soil and so forth. Or later on in the season, too. Haven't seen, again, that have a negative impact on yield on a lot of the trials. And also potential to take up nitrates. So a lot of different benefits. That again, some of the work that they've been doing. Also, I should add some novel cover crops we've been working with too, like pennycress and camelina, having those out so you get the benefits of the cover and all the other benefits from a cover crop, but also the potential to harvest that cover crop for another cash crop. That might impact the yield of, like, say, soybean, for example, but when you look at that total yield off the field in oil that's produced, for example, like camelina oil, it does have a market, limited right now, but again, there's potential to have a greater market. When you look at that total yield off the acreage, you're getting a better bottom line. So a lot of different things going on.
Well, in addition to protecting the soil from the wind and water movement across the topography, you talked about adding value in terms of another crop. How about pasturing or grazing or haying?
That's right, and that's one way. That's always a big question we get is, okay, cover crops, how do I pencil this out? And I admit that is a challenge, especially when we've got economic times right now. It's tough to have, an extra cost out there. Again, you've got to look long term, but I know a lot of people have been grazing cover crops too, and that can pencil out a lot of times very favorably economically. However, the thing that we talk a lot about is make sure if you're going to graze a cover crop, we tell our farmers, you got to make sure you're reading the label of those products. Make sure that you can actually graze that cover crop with the herbicide program that you're using. If you're in an organic system, that's a different story, but again, most of our producers aren't in organics. They're using herbicides for controlling pests and weeds. So again, you've got to make sure you read the label, make sure you're doing it legally, and that can legally be grazed. So that's a key thing that as well as that we look at.
Well, Liz, thank you for the work you do. Leading Edge Research and Technology, University of Minnesota, Liz Stahl.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Farm Connections. Stay tuned for more.
Farmers across Minnesota are making steady harvest progress thanks to a period of dry weather. According to the USDA, over 90% of Minnesota soybeans are harvested and nearly half of the corn crop. Farmers have taken advantage of favorable conditions to gather the harvest, but many are still battling wet conditions.
If I didn't say it was challenging, I'd be lying. So yes, it has been challenging. It's been, ups and downs, weather also.
With soybean harvest nearly complete, most farmers have turned their attention to combining corn, baling corn stalks, or dealing with other tasks that come with the fall harvest.
Overall, I'd say we're happy with how things are going. Knock on wood, everything keeps working well, and just keep plugging along.
With farmers working long hours, Mike Patterson of Compare Financial provides some relief to his farm clients by delivering lunches as part of the organization's Harvest Lunch program.
It's kind of a time where we get together, sack lunch for our clients, and we go out to the field and deliver it to them wherever they're at while they're working. It's kind of a fun thing for the client and for us as well.
While harvest is a taxing time, it's also an opportune time to promote Minnesota agriculture. Here's an example where wrapped hay bales are used for a pro-agriculture message. It's visible to travelers along Minnesota's busy Highway 52.
Well, it says without farming, you would be hungry, naked, and sober. Last couple of years, we've put messages on the bales just to kind of make people more aware of farming and things that are going on. And this year, just with the way things are going, I thought it would be fun to make people chuckle a little bit.
While progress is being made, most farmers hope the harvest window stays open a little longer.
A couple more weeks. I would like to have it all the way up to the week before Christmas. It would be nice. And then, yeah, you know, we got plenty of work to do.
This is Lynn Ketelsen reporting.
Looking towards the future, it's important to keep in mind the struggles of the past. It provides an opportunity to learn from those who have come before us and helps us put current matters in perspective. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thank you for joining us today on Farm Connections.